true knowledge of music and its spheres. Randy will explain how sounds could be the key to opening moments such as all of records underneath the Sphinx, which contain information about advanced civilizations even before literature. Randy will also reveal how bodies contain the microcosm of these codes and can be united through the sound to explore these ancient structures. He also designs subtle energy devices, which he has here and will demonstrate for you as well. This is going to be a fantastic presentation. You can give a really warm welcome for us.
Use this little.
Yes, I think we're just going to have to.
The mic is over there. Okay, should I not use the...
Yeah, don't use this spoon. They'll come up if they need to.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Appreciate very much everyone who was involved in putting this together. We didn't wire. It was just type of wiring. It's not in the grid. So therefore, everything I say will be off the record. To be there live. Put one on my heart. That's the one to listen to.
Oops.
Oh, this should be the other one. I look a little funny with the mic on my third eye. Okay, there we go. Jeez. Makes it hard to moonwalk with all this stuff going on here. My background has been very eclectic over the years, and due to that I find that I'm here before you talking about things that years before I was involved in performing most all of my life since I was a little kid, playing music and playing professionally since I was a child, playing lots of different musical instruments, trumpets, pianos, percussion, guitar, things like that. And pretty much considering that the only thing that I was going to do in my life and wanted to do other than, be able to function, pay bills and handle other functions was basically play music. And if I couldn't do that, I wasn't sure I really wanted to be on the planet, so it was like wall-to-wall music, practicing, playing, writing, publishing, transcribing, everything you could think of to do with music. And having other eclectic influences and interests, such as different sciences and archaeology and things like that over the years that were all pretty much like hobbies. I didn't actually consider that I was going to be doing anything professionally with any of that information other than play more music. And over the years I found ways to bring some of those influences into my musical performances, which added a certain amount of eclecticism and liner notes to records and things. And so when people would read those, they may get insights. But if you heard me play concerts with musicians from, like Africa or Brazil and Puerto Rico, Mexico, places like that, where I specialized in different types of ethnic music, if you just heard the music, you might not, you wouldn't be bombarded with numbers and correspondences to the pyramids and all of that type of thing. It didn't sound like scientific music, or it didn't sound like archaeological music or anything of that nature. But those influences kept creeping in over the years. I was teaching music in the university and so on, and getting more and more eclectic all of the time. And then something happened where a series of events that involved work in sacred geometry and meeting key people. And the next thing you know, my most played instrument became my science calculator. I was actually playing that calculator more than I was a lot of my musical instruments. The worst that it got is going to concerts, and then on the break in a concert, I might be backstage trying to figure out the latest thing with the pyramids with my calculator. And then it's not like I was a number freak with, wearing a white shirt with ink all over it and black horn rimmed glasses and not able to function or anything. I'm not trying to portray that. I'm just saying that, when you get into some of these magical discovery areas, it's much like looking for the Ark of the Covenant. There can be a place where you can begin to obsess on it. And then there's a fine line between obsessing and being committed and somehow trying to justify that with past life commitments and what you came here to do and all of that kind of thing. And it makes a real magical journey and fed me lots of energy to stay up all night looking for correspondences in the pyramids and in the DNA and every other kind of thing that I could think about. And it just kind of can get out of hand. It's very, very, very fascinating. So I want to convey, hopefully, as much from that in talking with you and being here, and perhaps playing a few of my selected tuning forks that I've had made to different things, if they can come across a few examples, and discuss in a very casual manner, because there are so many things in this area that are incredible, and a lot of it is not in any books, and there are clues in books, but I really haven't found that much that really gets down to the numbers and shows really all the correspondences. And there's so much out there in revealing the blueprints. And not that all of the numbers that I've encountered and their correspondences are absolutely the correct ones, but they do point in certain directions, and they show a unity and a coherence in the unified field that is absolutely remarkable. One thing I can say, it was sort of like the punchline. When all of this is said and done, one of the punchlines remains that I'm not looking for a unified field or questioning that it exists. It's coming from that it definitely exists, and the clues that it exists are everywhere. Everywhere we look. It's almost impossible not to find that coherence. Even things that seemingly look chaotic or out of tune or disharmonious, when stepping back farther from it or waiting till the wave completes and you see more of what the cycle has to reveal, it's incredibly coherent. And the punchline that I've found recently is that for a lot of people, that it is a unified field and that it is coherent, it seems to be a very scary thing for people. You kind of deal with that. It seems like a lot of things that have gone on throughout the history of the world, the known and unwritten history, shows that this world is totally coherent, and that there is incredible intelligence, mathematical intelligence, other types of intelligence, resonances behind everything and every phenomena. Seems to be something that for some is confronting. On one level, it's very exciting to get into it and look at it and make discoveries. But on another hand, as I've talked to people from different locations and different walks of life, there seems to be a point where they have to cross this bridge of acceptance that it is coherent and live their life differently as a result of that. You just don't throw trash out the window and other types of behavior when you realize that it's coherent and that it is, and that your actions, thoughts, and deeds and everything else contribute to that. So, in various kinds of research that I have looked into, no matter how much has gotten into things intellectually, there seemed to be that crossroad of acceptance of the beauty and the love and the majesty and the things that are here, in spite of the challenges and including all of the challenges and the amazing things that Nick outlined for us today, and to be able to walk that talk in the world, look at those things and take actions on it, and keep your wits about you and keep your sense of humor and your humanity and the way that you interact, and not sort of go under, you might say, or turn on yourself because of the facts and the things that you're looking at and whatever that you see about the world, which could be pointing to beliefs that, there's something wrong with this world or things to blame and that type, rather than taking responsibility for it. So I commend all of the researchers and Nick and other ones that I've met for walking the talk to look at these things and reveal truths. And again, I think that maybe they might even agree about that whole idea that for some, the nature of the intelligence of this world and coherency of it is something not everybody wants to accept and work with. So the way I've been approaching it mostly over the years is with sound, different aspects of dealing with sound. And in all the cases that I'm talking about sound and music of the spheres, it's not that it's all going to sound like music, like a song that you would sing or a song that you could hum or convey to somebody, that even in the sound of one note and what's going on in that one note, like listening to a bell or listening to a chant or doing a chant like Om or Hu or some other sacred syllable, with all of the harmonics that are in our voices or the instruments that we play, that there's a tremendous universe going on just in that one single sound. Many of the musicians that I've worked with over the years spent years and years practicing, trying to get that perfected, some kind of perfected sound that accessed another world. And you can imagine, like young violinists and trumpet players and others, where it takes quite a few years before the tone quality is something that the neighbors can appreciate, and the parents, and just working to get that sound and that tone. But when you have it, and when it clicks, just playing one note moves people tremendously. If you listen to a professional musician warming up ever, and they may just be playing one note, or they'll just run up and down a scale. Nothing that you would say is necessarily so musical, but the hours that went into it for them to come together and play that scale and play those notes with that perfection and with the flow of their soul coming through and the acoustics and the resonance of the room, especially if they go into ancient sites and sacred temples, and a lot of the churches in Europe that were organized around sound, special sound effects that those architects knew how to engineer, that have even exceeded architecture of today done with computers. A knowledge of what can happen with sound and acoustics, with the church breathing down on their necks, and doing it anyway, and having these incredible effects and acoustics. So many people have been tapping into this information, and often having to do it in their day and age in some type of a disguise, a way of playing it down or not discussing exactly what their music is about. And people coming along later and analyzing Beethoven or Bach or Mozart, the classical world, and others from other ethnic traditions, let's say in world music traditions, finding out that they really had a lot going on. And in order to stay alive and keep functioning, they also had to respect how to work with silence as well. I've been doing I met a gentleman from Egypt who named Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who used to be in charge of the Giza Plateau. He was the government official that interacted between the comings and goings of the Giza Plateau and the government and tourism and so on. And he's also the radiesthesia expert in the world. Now, radiesthesia, and this all relates, all of the different things that I'm talking about, and hopefully many times during this discussion, and by the end, I will tie it together as well. But one of the things that Ibrahim tapped into comes under the category of radiesthesia. And this is a branch of science that also is where feng shui and radionics evolves out of, that the ancients knew, the real ancients, not the dynastic Egyptian ancients, let's say, as far as that region of the world, but the real ancients that built those monuments knew about and passed on in the hieroglyphs. And one of the things that he's been working with is the power of sound that you cannot hear. And what's very interesting to me about that is this is not sound that is in the extreme high range like gigahertz and megahertz, or above the threshold of conscious human recognition, or the ELF waves, the extremely low frequencies that are below the realm of human conscious recognition. I mean by that, that you can't hear the note and sing it back, or consciously recognize what you're hearing, although you may be sympathetically vibrating to it, and other things that Nick was referring to also in terms of how the various devices that are frequency-oriented work. But in this world of frequencies, there are things that are above our hearing and below our hearing. And then there's another world of silent sound that is totally powerful. And what Ibrahim was doing was changing the shape of his tongue in his mouth, in the whole oral cavity, in such a way as to produce effects that affected the organs of the body, and recording them on CDs. So when you, of course, listen to the CD, you're not hearing anything. Total silence. Yet there is an effect being produced by the silent sound getting into the CD through the microphone recording technique, using standard microphones. This is not needing a special high-tech type of recording necessarily to produce. And this effect also corresponds, and this is all about resonance, and that's a key word here. This effect also corresponds to something else that he discovered, which were these shapes. that he calls biosignatures. And they're all kinds of different patterns that don't look like sacred geometry. They're not like all real nice angles and straight lines. They look like squiggles and spirals and things like that. And that these biosignatures, shapes, emitted resonant patterns that when you would put them on your body in 2 dimensions, like wearing a pendant or writing them on your skin, they communicated to the organs in such a way that the organs began to change their function and become more coherent along the lines of a healthy blueprint. And that was all done through resonance. And this also is part of music of the spheres. And again, so far, there isn't any music that we're talking about. I haven't played any musical examples. But all of these different realms that I'm talking about all come under the category of music of the spheres. So what Ibrahim Karim was doing, literally, was changing the health and well-being of organs by coming in contact with a little signature that you would just wear and interact with. And he also, and this is a follow-up comment for the previous discussion that Nick had, is putting these on cell phones changes the behavior of the cell phones. And his solution to the cell phone situation was, one, if the cell phones could be designed so that the shape of the cell phones would produce a different resonant field that would counteract frequencies moving through it. That's one way, just by the shape alone. And the other is he has some little stickers that you just paste on the phone because of the coherency of the symbol itself is so coherent that a little paper symbol changes the behavior of the electronic equipment, which is an extension of radionics. And this all comes into the field of radiesthesia. And it all comes back to resonance. And that's the key to the whole realm of the music of the spheres. It's all about resonance and how our universe, at least this one we can talk about, in whatever dimension that we're in, resonates to different phenomena. Everything resonates, whether we hear it or not, or whether we have the equipment to find out what that resonant pattern is. And some of this equipment does exist, but it doesn't mean you have it in your household or you carry it with you. But there is equipment that can determine the sound frequency of any physical phenomena, from vitamins to minerals to the chairs to this microphone. Everything is giving off signals that can be measured as to what their vibration is. So what a lot of the scientists are beginning to discover that are working in this area is just what are some of the resonant patterns of aspects of our reality, and what are the coherent resonant patterns. So on the positive side, there's discovering these things and sacred sites, and discovering that a lot of the sacred sites are tuned to particular vibrations that then also are altered by celestial movements of the planets and the stars, and movements within the earth, and other effects that change the windows. As earlier in this day, we're talking about special windows. Well, some of the windows occur when a particular planet like Sirius is rising at a certain time and sets up a set of harmonics. And if you happen to be going through an initiation at that time in a room designed to incorporate the knowledge and wisdom of what that movement and what those harmonics are, then other kinds of phenomena can happen to you. Being at the right place at the right time with proper ritual, not in a belief system or a dogma way, but proper ritual to set you up in a safe way to be able to receive these patterns, to be able to interact and interface with the sacred site, for your DNA and your DNA codes to interact in a safe way so that there wouldn't be healing crisis, and the person after the ceremony can then integrate the experience and then go about the next phase of their life integrated, rather than not being able to interface with this reality because of some profound experience that's taken place that had the intelligence to change patterns as far as in their DNA, so they would no longer be behaving in a particular way because they had an internal DNA code that was putting out a certain resonant pattern that was then playing out into the hologram and creating a reality or a drama to interact on. In other words, getting into the projector, at the core level, changing the program and having that program resonate out into your hologram, and then having a very different experience as a being, human being, or a very expanded super-type human being. In other words, a greater resolution of a perfected DNA resonating out into their reality and creating back whatever mirroring of that could be. You follow this? So all of these comments all come under the category of music of the spheres. Now this term, music of the spheres, has been documented, and Pythagoras is given a lot of credit for remarks about it, and other ancients, a lot of them in the Greek mystery schools. And certainly in his study, he went to Egypt and went through the mystery schools and learned that and brought it back to Greece, plus what other phenomenal experiences that he had. And he's been given a lot of credit for things that, he was taught, let's say, that he didn't really innovate. And it's not to take away credit, but it's just also to acknowledge that some of these great masters had a destination and a place to go where they were reactivated and guided through things in their memories and to clear their fields so this higher level of information could come out. And Pythagoras is often given a tremendous amount of credit for that. And then it progresses on through the ages, and you get different scientists who sometimes make comments about music. But I found it very interesting, and I still do, that a lot of the scientists... What's happening with the volume here? Is that changing? Okay. That a lot of the scientists who have musical background, many of them haven't really taken their musical background into the sciences to look at it. It's almost like their world of playing their musical instruments, if they're in a string quartet or something, like physicists that gather and play in a brass quintet or whatever, is almost independent of their other science research. And I find that very interesting. The majority of ones that I've met were not integrating their musical life and their scientific life together. And today, more and more, I am meeting people who are beginning to do that. But still, it's like the clues are obvious. When you start looking around, and I can show you some of the numerical resonances that relate to this, that back up what I'm saying. Because I spent years looking at the numbers very meticulously and what the formulas are for them and the correspondences. And I'm finding the new scientists are beginning to open up to a paradigm where they're embracing an interdisciplines in a better way. And for me, my own particular pathway is to look at everything musically. All phenomena that I've looked at in the sciences, I've looked at from a musical, harmonic point of view. And what I've done is label things for my own, in order to find my way through a matrix of numbers and correspondences with musical names and with musical frequencies. Like 12 inches, for instance, I will label the number 12 as a G note, because 12 hertz, or cycles per second, happens to be a G note. And I have a very meticulous numerical procedure for this so that I don't get lost in it. And it doesn't get fuzzy. It's very, very specific in terms of behavior of numbers and so on. But then I would label different phenomena. So then when I look at the measurements of the pyramids and other sacred sites, or look at the frequency of mitochondria or something, whatever I happen to get data on and look at it, I label it whether it's light, sound, feet, inches, miles, pints, liquid, all musically. And as I began to do that, I began to see tremendous correspondences of an integrity and a harmonic flow that existed in all walks of life. And what also occurred was in looking very carefully at the measurements of sacred monuments, and there are many different studies done of the monuments, and all studies do not reveal the same information. And you can imagine the amount of books out now just on the Great Pyramid alone, all claiming different types of measurements, depending on where they measured from where to where, and they don't always say exactly where the measurements were taken. And sometimes there's a little pin that's out there in the field, a little steel pin that's 1/4 of an inch in width, and they don't tell you whether they're measuring from the center of the pin or whether they're even acknowledging the pin. So here's 1/4 of an inch, and 1/4 of an inch sometimes in some measurements is enough to give you a total different picture on what the number is really saying. So it can become very tricky to sort this out. What I found very interesting, and this is a current belief I have, but I'm just kind of riding with it as I go along the journey, is I feel that a lot of the studies that have been done of the pyramids, on one level, they're all correct. And many of the pyramidologists and Egyptologists argue as well, no, this is the correct number and this is the correct number. And it seems to me that the intelligence of those monuments, and some others in the world too that aren't quite as famous or aren't talked about as much, are created at such a high level of intelligence that they're like symbiotic, and they interact with the researchers in such a way that where you're coming from, you create a certain resonant field. And then as you approach the monument with your beliefs and with your resonant field, the monument gives back to you according to that resonance. So then as you progress, and I've noticed with myself, as I've progressed more spiritually and opened up more in different ways, I saw different things that I didn't see in earlier parts of my searches and discoveries and investigations that indicate to me, or at least suggest, that as I've worked on myself and changed my own resonance, that has provided a key that let different levels of the monument come to me and be understood. And along with that would come, what are you going to do with the information as part of your resonance? What is your intention? Where you're coming from in your heart with it? Are you trying to take the information and make weapons out of it? Or are you trying to take this information and create some kind of a liberation with it in a balanced way? And is it your timing to see it? And all of those kinds of questions that I believe are part of our holographic field. So you get pyramid researchers talking about 365.252 or 242, whatever they're referring to, days in a year, let's say, and they will say, well, see, this measurement in the pyramid shows you it's just a multiple of that, and therefore the pyramid is a calendar. And then they will trace the life of Jesus and others and show you by pyramid inches different things that happen. And there's a whole reality of resonances built around the Gregorian calendar. And the Gregorian calendar, to me, is not relating to natural cycles, like the lunar cycles and so on. To me, it's like a dream spell, calibration that throws you off from the center of the basic cyclic activity that's influencing all of life. That particular 365.242 type number, okay? As opposed to using 12 and 13 and variations between 12 and 13 lunar cycles and events that can be calculated and observed that regulate all aspects of our life here as natural cycles. So that's kind of what I would say more like the dream spell. Yet, nevertheless, the researcher looking at the pyramid comes in and looks at these measurements, and here are everything that they'd want to know that shows the Gregorian calendar in live and living color in the Great Pyramid. Now, I can't say, because there is a math of it, and if it's done meticulously enough, it seems to show that that's absolutely correct, that this pyramid says, yes, this is a true reality. Because we have been referencing to it a lot for quite a long time. So it is a reality to contend with, even if it's not based on natural cycles. And then there's other levels of the pyramid that are like an onion skin. You peel one off, and then here's another level underneath with a totally different understanding. For instance, the work that I've been doing with Wesley Bateman, he spent 30 years working on the pyramids. He writes for the Sedona Journal of Emergence, a lot of different articles, and some interesting ones through Alien Eyes. He had a series, and Light Technologies Press is going to publish that book. It should be out pretty soon, where he's telepathically communicated with beings for 30 years all around the galaxy with a type of telepathy. It's not channeling, and he has that type of information. Then he published a series of 4 books called The Rods of Amun-Ra. And that was about the measurements of all the known measurements of the 3 major pyramids of Giza. Every room, every little cavity, nook, and cranny you can imagine, plus a few other pyramids in Teotihuacan, Tiahuanaco, and so on. Not obviously all the pyramids that exist out there, but he targeted a few essential ones and did a massive study. And in telepathing with beings off planet who have given him insights and guidance and so on, he made a series of discoveries that shows another world of the Great Pyramid, and this is a world that he and I have been working with that shows the subatomic world. The entire Great Pyramid showing everything you'd want to know about the periodic table and the behavior of the elements, their wavelengths, and so on. In other words, a total scientific Bible, so to speak, compendium of the world of science, including various constants that our physicists use in their calculations that, of course, however old you might say the pyramid is, let's take it back maybe 1 million years or older, that some of these scientists like Rydberg and Balmer and other physicists, their names might have not been known as that in an earlier time. But the physical constant that they use in their calculations, the pyramid measurements will reveal that constant. And some of the cases, the numbers that the scientists are using are a little bit different. Just like the Gregorian calendar is just a little bit out of phase. And what happens, as I've looked at all of those numbers, and believe me, I'm not trying to do a number on you in discussing these things. I really want to get to a place where, in today, where you can find a place where this is user-friendly information or user-friendly inspiration for something. Not that you need to retain any of these numbers, but understand perhaps that in the use of it, it is a sacred language. It is a type of a transmission. Even my talking to you, anything that I write on the board or discuss that is aligned with how the blueprints work, it's a wake-up call. It's a remembering. Even if you don't work with calculators, you don't work with any kind of high-level or simple mathematics other than simple things around your basic living, checkbooks, balancing this and that, and so on. Still, we all have the divine right to know how these blueprints work because it's built into us. It's part of our heritage. And so, there may be some of you who, for instance, have not liked math. And that wasn't a pleasant experience in public education or other educational situations where, the study of math was not really fun. And maybe others of you got to that place where you could get a high the way musicians get a high when they play music. I don't mean a substance-induced high. I mean, from just playing with resonance of music and breathing and the natural playing acoustic and other instruments and rhythms and so on, put themselves into expanded brain states and consciousness travels. But being able to do that with mathematics and having it not be a head trip, having it not be something where the left brain and the third eye is overdriving the system in the heart and taking you off on a tangent, although it's easy for that to happen. But what I found in doing this work is a place where in studying the mathematics of the unified field, it was the same experience as composing music when I was writing on scores with pencil in hand and writing on the score paper. Because as the numbers reveal themselves, they have personalities just like musical notes. And they talk and they're characters. And there is a divine language. And once you're open to that, when you're sitting in front of that language and watching the numbers revealing different relationships, it's like listening to a symphony. They're talking. And that's how I hear it. Like cartoon characters, for instance, that are all becoming animated because of the way that I'm interacting and studying that. And I'm inviting you to open up to that possibility. Not that you're going to rush out and buy books on unified field mathematics and that's going to be late night or early morning reading, For some, I read in those books and I have my calculator there and I go back through the formulas and retrace it and see if I can understand things. And then I often substitute other formulas for the ones that they're using, and I've discovered quite a few different things about minerals and lights and sound and the speed of light and the distance, why the moon is the size it is, it's a specific size and there's reasons for it and things of that nature. And the more that I got into it, the more I felt things were becoming coherent. And I felt a love running through my feeling. In other words, I didn't use the numbers to create a distance between myself and reality. It actually brought it closer. Where I see this heading is, of course, taking this knowledge consciously and doing things like making music with it, putting these numbers into various kinds of machines like the Rife machines and so on. We've taken Rife frequencies and recalibrated them with frequencies from the Great Pyramid, and there's been some very, very interesting results. There's been other experiments that have been done of like desalinating salt water using pyramid frequencies and having the salt drop right out of the water, playing one note into the water. One single note properly calibrated. And it's very interesting. Maybe some of you may think, well, you're not really, if you're not working the math, you might not have an appreciation for decimal resolution and how many points past the decimal can you deal with. But if you're dealing with tone generators and electronic sound, and there are certain frequencies that you want to deal with, and there's a lot of decimals involved, you want to represent as great a picture of that whole as you can. Relative to things that are flexing in our world, like there's wobbles in our electricity. So a lot of electronic instruments are wobbling and such. It's very difficult to pin them down to something. And in some cases, the way the resonances work, you don't want to pin it down. You want to let it breathe, and it's crossing over a bass line. A lot of the work that's done in England with the Kymatics devices and so on for healing with sound involve dialing up frequencies and somehow being able to get those frequencies into a human biosystem, but not so much locking on like a digital clock and that type of entrainment, but it's a type of playing the frequency, and the frequency crosses over a baseline, a little to the left, a little to the right, allowing for the uniqueness that we all have. And there's somewhere in the crossing of that frequency over that baseline, it'll hit certain magic moments, certain windows, like Nick was talking about. And when it hit those moments, magical things would happen. Magical in the good sense of magic. In other words, something that reminds you of a higher level of coherence, a higher level of well-being, including diseases and other types of physical challenges and illnesses disappearing. And that wasn't always because you hit the number right on. It's because somehow there was a breathing. And at the same time, there's other effects where we had to have very high decimal resolution before the effect occurred. The saltwater technique needed 5 decimal points to occur. So here's a particular number that they were working with, and until that number got to 5 points after the decimal, the effect didn't happen. And you could just breathe on something and have the machines wiggle at that level. Musicians cannot play their acoustic instruments and maintain that kind of decimal resolution. I mean, just in breathing and the acoustics in the room and their musical instruments heating up and cooling off, and there's this flexing and breathing that our reality has. So I've had to straddle this world between extremely high precision and another world of relaxing and letting things breathe to notice where the effects are. And so some of this research then is to be used in benevolent ways, to go into devices that are being built that can broadcast frequencies to do various things. There's experiments being done now playing frequencies to plants and growing plants at an incredible rate within 12 hours from seed to shoot, and even having dead plants being brought back to life with sound frequencies without putting strobes into the soil. Simply playing the music through a simple sound system, and the plants are hearing it in the room as we would. Remarkable and tasty fruits and vegetables with, very juicy types of things. I'm not talking about creating some kind of aberration in a fruit or vegetable, but things that are healthy. So this is all about resonance. I find it in my own belief and in my own work, it's that we're made out of sound and everything vibrates. Whether we know what it vibrates to and we can describe it, but everything vibrates and resonates. And things change. Not everything continues to vibrate at the same rate. There's even changes and rates of change and pulses. But the whole universe in every way is vibrating. So it's made out of sound. And then somehow in that process of creation, light occurs. In my own investigations, it seems like it starts with the sound, and it's the sound current that takes us back home in near-death experiences and in other experiences of completing a physical lifetime and going back to other domains, is riding on sound current. I believe that that's the fundamental of it. So it's showing in what I'm talking about, what I've been committed in looking at, the supreme importance of sound and resonances in every way. And yet you have popular music, and a lot of music that's played and sells a lot and is extremely popular financially in other ways, that as powerful as sound is, I look out in the world at some of the ways that sound is being utilized. Now, I'm not wanting to say this as a judgment. It's like looking to see what is happening. What is the sound doing? What's happening to people listening to boom boxes at extremely loud volumes where the screws and bolts in the car are coming undone? and their hearing is going out. And hearing tests are being performed on people to find out what's happened, and extreme losses of hearing from driving around in a small contained environment, often with the windows up, with the sound at very loud levels. And sound intensities can greatly affect the organ functioning and entrainment, because people go into sympathetic resonance with these entrainments. And if the signals are strong enough, that entrainment can then begin to change organ, brainwave activity, and so on. What Nick was talking about earlier, like taking a particular frequency and then subtracting from another one, so you get 7 cycles per second in order to get that alpha or theta, depending on where exactly you are in it. Those are called difference tones. Anytime you take one frequency and you subtract a lesser one from it. Now this is something that's incorporated into the ancient instruments that have been studied from around the world. Tibetan bells, for instance. Even a single bell has more than one frequency built into it. There's a fundamental tone, essential, predominating fundamental, and then depending on where you strike the bell, in different parts of the bell, there's other effects that are all calculated into the bell. A number of years ago, there was a musical archaeological find of gongs and bells in China that were dug up, that were buried in the mud. And somehow, the way this mud interacted, it preserved the metals. There was nothing that was destroyed. So they cleaned it all up and measured the bells. And then on the outside of the bells, and they've determined, at least by traditional standards, that these bells are at least 3,000 years old. On the outside of the bell were the engraving instructions on how to cast the bells and what the frequency should be. That they knew exactly how to do that. They didn't just make a bell and sit around for years with a file, filing it away till they could hit certain pitches. That they actually knew the mathematics and the structure of how to cast it properly. And they said in this study that there is no one in the world today with any manufacturing and scientific production that could make those bells any more accurate than they were 3,000 years ago. That's really, really remarkable. What I began to do with those bells, and it's typical if I get a study like that, is I start looking at things to see what I can discover. And I found all kinds of different correspondences relating to things like in the pyramids and different measurements and so on. I'm looking at, well, what are they tuning to? Why did they tune those bells to those frequencies? And questions like, were those frequencies specific to maybe cultures thousands of years ago? Or are those frequencies still relevant to something else that is still appropriate today, that does not have to be recalibrated for our given time? Maybe there are essential things about the frequencies of bone. Some of them were frequencies of what human bone actually resonates to, and still resonates to today by today's measurements. Other ones, I believe, relate to things such as different organs and cavities in the brain and hormones and things in the brain that they knew about, that they knew how to access. One of the things that the Tibetan sounds are doing when they're chanting, for instance, is they are forming cavities in their mouth by the way they pronounce the words of the mantras that are a little bit different than most people how they would pronounce it, even with correct pronunciation. So they're using their body as a resonant temple, and I believe that's the posture that they hold. And then they're shaping their tongue and their teeth and their cavity and the way they use their air, and they're pronouncing these sacred syllables. And then they're, with visualizations, guiding the sound to different parts of the brain, and basically like doing acupuncture with acupuncture needles on themselves, using sound and directing it to different parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which is where the unconscious is, that part, glands, the pineal, pituitary, hypothalamus, the medulla oblongata area here in the back, around the occipital area, that they have mapped that out and are able, with sound, in the way they pronounce the sounds, to do tonal acupuncture and open up conscious gateways. And further extensions of that also involve things like the levitation of matter using sound, creating resonant fields that cancel out the effect of gravity and so on. All done with sound. And it's very interesting to me. I feel it's important for us to pay attention to what is going on with sound and also what is not going on. Because it's very easy in this society to see see the entertainment in music and enjoy the entertainment and the lights and the show and the dance and everything that can be, and be distracted from just really getting below that, just how powerful the sound is and the entrainment that can happen and what can happen with the right intention in large audiences and what can happen with sound that's above our hearing. And many of the science devices and things like HAARP and that are out there, I believe that many of the people working on these things know quite a bit about what sound can do and have tapped into it. They're not published in the scientific journals, those studies, but in order to achieve certain effects that they have, they've had to know something about how the unified field dances and what dance that they want to play with it. And that sound, I'm not in any way trying to tell you that what I am saying is more important than anything else at all. I'm just saying that I believe it is truly a sound reality. This is a fundamental bottom line point. It is a sound reality, and whatever we can do consciously with sound can greatly help, including changing our thoughts and therefore emitting a different radiance that affects matter, including what we tune to, what we listen to, how we play. And this kind of information can greatly affect the changes of lives of musicians and how they approach their instruments and what they tune to. I've studied what musicians have tuned to over the years, and I found it extremely interesting, the changes of pitch. Initially, I was very skeptical when A440 was adapted, because the U.S. military adapted A440. They were one of the first to get on that, and I thought, well, what's really going on there? And it took me a while to investigate that. And so why should a country try to stabilize, in many countries in the world, the standard pitch that they're working with? One of the things you have to deal with as a musician is if you have an instrument made in France that's tuned to a certain pitch standard, the physics of that instrument are geared to resonate in a certain window. And you bring it to the United States, and here we're tuning it to A440, and in France, let's say it was 435. The instruments don't play the same. They don't sing the same because the physics and the resonant windows are different. They may be beautiful, but there's a place that they just don't take off and fly on their own. There's a zone where that can happen. When you hit the right resonances for the instrument and everything comes together, there's these magic sweet spots that happen. And it just doesn't quite happen like that. So they've tried to, and if you have like a vibraphone player, if you play it, or a xylophone or something, and you go to Europe to play in an orchestra, and you bring your instrument with you, that orchestra may be tuning to a completely different thing, and you can't play your instrument. Therefore, you have to use an instrument made in that country to go with the orchestra that's tuned to that orchestra. And this is getting crazy again. Orchestras all over the world are tuning to all kinds of different pitches. And it's not a big problem for some violinists, and certainly not for vocalists. But a lot of fixed pitch instruments, it's really a challenge. So they got a group of people together in the late 1800s and again in the 1900s to try to stabilize that. So you could buy an instrument made in France, play it in the United States, play it in Japan, and you're going to be able to have those sweet spots. And they couldn't totally agree, but the scientific world seemed to go for the A440. And then in studies that Fabien Maman did of taking equal tempered tuning, which is the basic tuning structure that's been used for several hundred years and in most all of American popular music and most world popular musics that use keyboards and guitars relate to this type of tuning. Even Harleston in his reports on the pyramids and talking about Teotihuacan feels that the avenue of the dead in Teotihuacan is laid out in like frets, like on a guitar fretboard, moving along at the 12th root of 2, which is the half step in that tuning system. And that's not exactly the number, but it's very close, and it's a non-rational number and is not necessarily what the ancients would have done because there's no way to measure it. I mean, the decimals go on infinitely. There's no way to chop it off somewhere and ever get the whole wave. But sometimes researchers see a number and they'll grab the closest number to that they're familiar with and make a whole theory and belief about it. And when you see other correspondences, they show that that's not necessarily the intelligence involved there. So anyway, Fabien Maman did studies on human blood, playing different frequencies to it and taking photographs, Kirlian photographs and other things. And when they played A440, it formed these beautiful angel patterns, and pink light occurred every time. Incredible cell rejuvenation abilities that occurred from the use of the A440. So I went through quite a journey with that one where I was initially skeptical when any time certain types of agencies decide to establish a fundamental. I'm very curious as to what their intention is. But it turned out in this case that R440, you can hear it in dial tones on telephones and lots of different things, that this is a very functional cellular rejuvenation, healthy frequency to be dealing with. And it is a very good target frequency that if the world were to rally around a given frequency for their musical instruments, here's something that can actually bring people together. It's not the only example, it's just one of the many. Now, this historically, the nature of changing the fundamental pitch is a very big thing. And I'm going to give you an idea of how this relates to things like HARP and other projects like that, because I'm wanting to tie a few things together here in the discussion, especially because of interests that I'm aware of that many of you have, and the nature of this gathering. So I'm basically altering the sequence of things that I'm going to talk about with the intent that I want to get into a rapport with you on those particular interests. And I'll take questions too pretty soon. So that I can more selectively respond to your interests. In China, the basic tactic involved in political change was as soon as a new emperor or ruler came into power, their first act with their council was to change the fundamental tone that that kingdom tuned to. That would be like saying after this coming election, they would get together and have a powwow and realize that they needed to change our fundamental tone that we're all relating to, so that we cannot hold on to the former politics. We cannot hold the family unit together and the vibratory field that was happening with the previous belief systems. And the first place that they did throughout Chinese history was to change the tone that the musicians played in. That meant it was forbidden to tune to the previous pitch. Everybody had to tune to a brand new pitch and entrain to a new pitch. Now, there was different ways that they selected that pitch, but you can see the politics of changing that pitch. Can you imagine every 4 years or so with a new political election, all of a sudden having to change the major pitch? That means their vibraphone player that's just spent $3,000 to $5,000 for his set of vibes has to get a whole new set of keys every time there's a political election. Singers can change, no problem. Violin players with no frets, they can play other pitches, but some musicians can't. So everybody would have to rally around the central tone. And you look at what is the intelligence behind those central tones and why are they tuning to what they're tuning to. That's very important to look at, that type of thing. And often what happened in the political arena in China is when the emperor would speak in a relaxed tone with a certain vibration in his voice, they would find the pitch and then they would make that be the new fundamental tone. And then everybody would be tuning in sympathetic resonance with that vibratory field of the emperor. Very, very specific. And there's other things too that were used in this particular realm of changing pitch. So pay very close attention to things. What I found often in my musical performances that increased the feeling of love in an audience is we tune to the frequency of Venus. And what Venus's rotation around the Earth was. It's a very, very simple formula. Looking for this writing implement. If anybody wants to do it, there's books by Hans Cousteau called The Cosmic Octave that discusses it. But basically what you do is you take the number of seconds in whatever the cycle around the sun is, the total number of seconds here, and you put 1 over it, and that'll give you the number of vibrations in 1 second. And then you multiply that times 2 to some power to get it up into the audio power. Up into the audio range that we're comfortable with. And you can do this with all of the rotations of the planets and the moons. And I've observed that and found these frequencies and things related to this in the sacred monuments. It's very, very interesting. So I did the one for Venus. Anybody wants to tune to it, it's 442.5 459 hertz if you want to tune to that frequency. It's very easy for piano tuners to adjust most pianos up to that pitch. And what I was doing when I did that was I was creating something else for us to reference to. And by referencing to Venus, and there's all the stories about Venus and the beauty and love and all of this and everything from myth and so on. But I found with the musical groups that I tuned to that particular pitch, there was a greater love present playing exactly the same music that we'd always played. That something happened when they tuned up to this pitch. It was very, very, very interesting. And I'm not saying that that's the only one. There's lots of incredible things to tune to with it. But that worked, and I've done things with other planets, and you can get recordings of this music played on an Indian instrument with a lot of overtones by Joachim Berendt, B-E-R-E-N-D-T, and his recordings are available from Life Rhythm up in Mendocino, Life Rhythm Company, and they're imported from Germany, and you can hear the different sounds of the planets and what they do. Incredible things to resonate to, because they are frequencies that are happening, but we don't hear them because they're so low, extremely low, below 1, like 30 some octaves sometimes below 1 hertz, way down there. But it's still having an effect on us. And when we go into entrainment with that in a good way, by playing it and going into resonance with it, it brings out different qualities. Now, a friend of mine, Michael Helios, was doing work with people with their astrological signs, and he would make tapes. So if you had a challenge in your astrological sign, he would put the frequencies of those aspects of astrology onto cassette tapes to listen to, and had really, really powerful results with that. It was so powerful that when he mailed his tapes out from one post office on the East Coast, his tapes were always confiscated and they didn't arrive at the destinations. That created a problem for him. He tapped into something in the nature of sound. And again, the smoke screen is all of the popular music and things, and let us know that, yeah, music is here and it's around in our environment. You'll kind of take it for granted. But the really, really powerful things going on in music that sometimes don't meet our ears, and our early conscious recognition until we begin to delve into it and see really what's going on. And that also includes the study of insects and what they relate to, like the honeybee, 14,400 beats per minute. Very interesting. Again, that 144 that you hear in a lot of the spiritual metaphysical circles and so on. And here's a honeybee beating with those sacred numbers. And there's a lot of sacred monuments tuned to those numbers as well that occur. Well, when you change it to beats per second, it's 240, and that's an octave of our refrigerators, the 60-cycle hum, which is very incoherent with the way their electricity is now. But that doesn't give 60 cycles a bad rap. It's only that application of 60 cycles. So here's a honeybee basically flying along in octaves to our refrigerators. And Phil Callahan is a wonderful scientist who's studied effects all over the world. He's gone to the war zones in the world and measured the sound frequencies in those areas, like Yugoslavia and Middle East, everywhere, and found certain indications that when an area begins to break down in the frequency, the soil breaks down, the climate changes, scavenger insects come in, people begin to argue and fight, and things happen. And when the frequency, or let's say the harmonic fractal of a greater love connection is restored to the area, there's a different climate, the soil conditions change, the insect behavior changes, and people's interpersonal relationships change. And this also goes into lots and lots of other areas, including the distances between cities and what their harmonics are. Everything that you can think about, from our measuring systems to what we listen to what vibrates in our cells, and exactly what the frequencies of healthy things are in our cells. These things can be looked at, can be worked with, can be harnessed in such a way that good, benevolent use can be done with it to get back and recalibrate ourselves back on track. And there's a lot of things that have been slightly harmonically detuned that once you recalibrate it, okay, does this mean time for questions or no time for questions?
Yeah, time for questions.
Time for questions, okay. Okay, well, very interesting. Let me play it. That's the frequency of the coffer in the king's chamber. Does it feel okay to you? It's very interesting. The mathematics of that note is simply an octave of the square area in meters of the floor of the king's chamber. It's exactly the same number octavized. I mean, there's incredible things that are involved in these monuments, and I've been making tuning forks and things and doing work and tuning human energy fields and such with it, and to put us back in touch as like they jolt our memory and remind us of phenomena and aspects of our journeys. And that's a very good part of remembering and awakening. It's almost like a type of rebirthing. You hear a certain note and you haven't heard that note for 3,000 years, you know, and something goes off. It's just time for it to go off in you. There's some questions? Yes.
Johannes Kepler
yes.
studied music of the spheres and was also an astrologer.
Yes.
These numbers are fascinating me as an astrologer. I've always been amazed at why, I mean, not why, but how astrology works, because I know it does. And now, can you comment on this? I mean, in a scientific way.
Yeah, without taking, you know, other areas of beauty and things out of that field of study. There's certainly what is in the science of the movement of the stars in light and what that light does coming from these different planets and stars and beaming and making codes go off inside us based on that. How they move, the angular velocities and scientific measurements of the rotations and the spiral rotations, the sizes of those planets, their proximities. The ancients knew that information because the mathematics of that is also encoded in their monuments, which showed that they knew it at that level. To me, that's getting into another heart of the science of astrology. And when you combine that with proper interpretations and so on, I feel it's basically that is part of the music of the spheres. And these are spheres. Music of the spheres meaning spheres of consciousness. And some are literally spheres and spheroids like planets are. But the angular velocities and other movements that are in there, when you calibrate them and use the harmonics and play those back to people, incredible things happen with it. And that can be incorporated into astrology and worked with. Tapes and CDs can be made, and also tuning forks and things to listen to help rebalance the archetype patterns that are there that they're talking about. And that's one part of it. I mean, it's a very, very deep subject, you know. But I hope that little bit may give a clue. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. You might want to read The Cosmic Octave by Hans Cousteau. It's got some very good insights in that area. Life Rhythm publishes it. It's very beautiful. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, I'm Betsy Manning in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, they're putting up solar towers all over the place. And I noticed that there's a lot of road rage. And I know I'm getting older, but in the last 6 months, crossing the street, people are just, they're like bees, they're out of control.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that frequency from the solar antenna would have something to do with road rage, besides they're using the cell phones in the car, but,
yeah.
But if it would.
It could, absolutely. No problem. I've noticed that too, increase of behaviors and different things from having less coherency and scattering frequencies and so on. And it's easy to tune to those and broadcast them so that, you know, in a matter of moments, one could go into rage from, you know, normal, you know, very casual behavior to all of a sudden totally enraged. Those high frequencies and the extremely lows can create entrainment so quickly, it's remarkable. You know, the tuning of all of that stuff is definitely to be considered. And then what one would need to do to counteract or to embrace it, to lessen the resistance and not go into entrainment with it through consciousness. It doesn't have to entrain one, but certainly there are indicators that a person may be carrying that makes it easier for them to go into that entrainment. So I believe the antidote is in our own consciousness field to create such a loving field that passes through and does not create the entrainment and becomes transformed. And in a way like in martial arts and just letting the opponent fall on their own energy. You know, that can be dealt with. And it can be dealt with shapes and sacred shapes and other resonances and even thinking different resonant thoughts. Because there's higher levels of intelligence than those frequencies. And once you tap into that type of resonance, you know, you're thinking and believing and radiating so differently, they don't have the same effect. To me, that's been more the saving grace of dealing with it. Because there have been times when I felt very overwhelmed by the things that I heard about what the frequencies could do. But actually your consciousness field, by increasing that, and radiating enough love that you truly feel is so high. It's way higher than any law of the octave will ever create with those frequencies. But certainly, I believe that that's happening. And intentionally so, too. That's my point of view on it, anyway. Hi.
I'm Celine from Walnut Creek, and if anybody's here from AskMe.com, I'm at a conference on AskMe.com on Go to Heart. For years, I wanted to try to get this healing technique that you're talking about on the cellular level in feature films like movies. You go to watch a movie, you get healed.
Yes.
Some people have told me that it would be considered subliminal and therefore would be illegal. Is there any way you can think, I was kept me thinking, I don't know.
To do that in a legal manner?
How can you get around, the obvious stupidity of the ruling on subliminal stuff in movies?
Yeah.
Can you imagine, as popular as films are and as much money as they're making, if we can actually reap a huge benefit every time we watch it?
There's many thinking this and working on this that are in the film industry. I know some of these people. They're actually working on ways to do that. We've been talking about it for a number of years, and I've been meeting some of the people. And there's ways to do it that aren't subliminal, that are absolutely out in the open and very powerful.
Is there a way I can get involved with that?
Yeah, there are. I can give you some numbers. There's people to call, and there are things being done to do that. To use sound, to use other aspects of film and color and other technological things for that consciousness. More is known about this than you might think, and it is actually going on. And it's sort of like reverse engineering it from the heart, from a different place. And so it is totally on the mark. What you're talking about, and doing that without going against free will and totally respecting that, so you don't get those legal things. Okay, yeah, I can get you in touch with some people too. Hi.
My name is Joe Rosa with Rocky.
Hi.
A lot of people believe, maybe on a conscious level, that the pyramid has a lot to do with our reality. Your research is proving.
Yes, it does.
Is that possible?
Did you? Hi.
Well, I do a lot of personal research into that type of stuff, and vibrations and colors being vibrations, frequencies.
Yeah.
And when I was in Taos, New Mexico, I sensed a hum. And it made me angry for a second that they
Yeah.
manipulated.
Yeah.
But it didn't affect me in the sense that it affected me on a daily basis. I'm still asleep, let's say.
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. And like Nick said, take 16,000 in one ear and 16,007 in the other, and you meet a certain place in the brain and you activate that response. Is there a way that collectively a group could get together and counteract their manipulation?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you can create a whole different resonance where. Yeah, absolutely. It's that powerful.
Do you believe that the obelisk and the pyramid were in a sense?
That's all part of the same system. It's like acupuncture on the earth and acupuncture in deep space and tuning and antennas. There are specific height, width, every single dimension and aspect and placement, and geophysical placement from a satellite's point of view is absolutely all totally mathematically encoded. The key with the Giza pyramid is it's 31 degrees, 8 minutes, 0.8 seconds away from Greenwich. Greenwich is the dream spell coordinate for longitude and latitude. It is not the way the sacred monuments. The sacred monuments revolve around the center of the Giza pyramid, which is at the largest equatorial and polar landmass, right in the center of it. Yeah, and that's the 0360 point. And when you look at all of the longitude and latitude of all the sacred sites relative to that, they speak perfect harmonic language using the set of just a few constants and pi. Completely. You multiply degrees times seconds times minutes, and you get certain magic numbers. And it's all coherent, including various sacred mounds. Carl Monk, that's his work in archaeocryptology. And he's got books out called The Code and the Initiate Scrolls and so on. And he has studied almost all the sacred monuments and any new ones that come up. The longitude and latitude and the math, it's absolutely incredible. And the obelisks are part of that. The obelisk in Washington, D.C. is a functioning acupuncture needle that's up and functioning. It's in a very specific place, you know.
In front of the president every day so that he knows
Yeah, it's a functioning device, not, you know, and it functions as a monument also, which is kind of part of the dream spell of it, but it also has a...
Everything's dichotomous.
Yeah, exactly.
It's supposed to...
Those obelisks...
It serves a purpose in the way it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the math, and the color wavelengths are there, 486 feet, counting the capstone, that's one of the spectral lines of hydrogen in the blue indigo range. Exactly, that wavelength. And, you know, the diagonal cross-section of the pyramid is another hydrogen length, 2624. Yeah, absolutely. You change those resonances, and all those numbers are resonating. And so they put them in that pyramid right on the number 1 point, and it goes to all the meridians everywhere, radiating those sacred numbers to the field, not only for the Earth, inside the Earth, and out into space.
I was curious to satisfy one question, was of the 3 largest pyramids, the White Pyramid in China,
Yeah.
the one in Mexico, and the one in Egypt, do they actually all have the same footprint? I heard they were exactly the same.
Well, there are certain angles that are different and certain measurements that are different because of where they are and how they function. And all the stuff about that white one is not in yet in terms of being able to gather real... Yeah, well, the Chinese government's ordered people to do that, to make them look like mounds so that they don't look like sacred sites. They're trying to disguise them and make them look like hills.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Not to prioritize culture as one over another, but you mentioned something to the effect of the Mayan civilization.
Yes.
The pyramids. Are you familiar with the Mayan calendar?
Yes.
And have you heard something to the effect of it being the most scientifically accurate calendar known to man?
Well, it's in that group, and there's not just one Mayan calendar. There's a whole series of them. They're all calibrated to different things, and the mathematics is just staggering. From our base 10 point of view, and then if you look at it with another mathematical base, there's, you know, who's to say the Mayans didn't just work in base 10? You know, base 12 is a very important one also. And the calibrations and the harmonics and things, it's incredible what's in that. From what I've seen and what I've been able to assimilate so far, it's just spectacular. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the predictive element must happen. You know, that certain things have to happen on a certain date because of all the free will and so on. But the other mathematics of it is really incredible, all the way down to the DNA and other astronomical data. Yeah, it's a harmonic, coherent system, you know, if looked at properly, and how to use the calendar in the proper way. Yes. I hope that helps.
Back to the music, with the helium tones and frequencies and Tibetan aspect to it. I've heard that it's possible to put these frequencies into water.
Yes.
So could you put a whole, like a complex musical piece into water and it would have the same effect and drink that water?
Yeah, and you use caution with that. Water takes on all the thought. There's people in Japan and Europe now photographing the structure of water and showing the clustering of it and the geometries being changed, not only through prayer but other substances. And you need to watch that. If you put the frequencies of the planets into water in certain combinations, you could go into some very challenging healing situations. One, because of the water is the supreme element there, and what you do to structure that water, to me, reigns supreme. I think that's like one of the number one. You clean up, a couple scientists, friends of mine, are really working on that, and basically the conclusion is you clean up water, you know, you're helping to restore the goddess. And then all of us, and how important that water is, and how the right kinds of water interact with the phosphorus and the DNA in the body, and the electromagnetics and the functioning of chakras and so on. So anything that can be done to structure it, but it can also be structured with such potent stuff that's like it's as strong as the strongest homeopathics you can imagine. So what you put in the water must be done with a clear enough intent, because when you drink it and how it radiates through the body can actually throw you out of balance. So I'm putting that caution in there. It's a wonderful area, but it also has to be approached with a tremendous respect because of water's ability to take on any kind of resonance. It has total memory of its entire journey. Everywhere it goes, it's like a tape recorder of the Akashic records. And when you drink it, you're drinking all the emotions and memory and everything. So it needs to be cleared and structured in a prayerful way. So thank you for that question.
What happens with distilled water?
It can be structured. It has no electrical potential without having minerals in it. Okay, there's various things that can be done for cleansing and so on in certain appropriate times. And there's also types of distilled water that can create problems in the body. But it can be structured with certain additives that will cluster it and make it look like snowflake patterns. And there's several scientists who have additives for distilled water available. Dr. Lee Lawrenson is one, and several others that I'm aware of, who are structuring it. And there's 61 clinics in Japan now using structured distilled water to treat very specific illnesses. Very interesting stuff going on there. But again, with distilled water, using the proper cautions, because the lack of the minerals in it does not give it the certain spin rates. So when it's structured properly with other additives, then those spin rates can come up. But it can also create havoc in the system and throw things out of balance. So my experiences I've had and with other medical people I've interacted with is to be very cautious with how you use distilled water. You can put out electrical fires with distilled water, and the electricity does not run down the water, you know. When those big PG&E things catch on fire, some of them they put out with distilled water. Very interesting. So water is a key issue, and prayer, and I'm working on projects with a number of people to help restore water bodies, and it's happening. There's things that are being done now where they're broadcasting radionically 2 photographs of different areas, and the water is cleaning up. And governments in those areas are measuring it, and the water is absolutely cleaning up quickly and within hours, and by those standards that they're measuring. And from what I hear, is as bad as it is out there in the water and the toxicity levels, with the right harmonic implications, it can be turned around very quickly. The question is the speed at which it's turned around so that you can still create balance. And not, sometimes healings can occur so quick that there's another problem. So that level of compassion must be factored into the equation. The way the extraterrestrials work with their mathematics is like 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3. The 3 is the third areas, all the effects that are created from the resonances that are factored into it. So if they created something to change the water, they would also know that there could be a problem from cleaning the water up in the wrong manner, too fast. You know, in terms of timing, so that other things can balance and breathe with it. That kind of, do you follow me? Yeah, and having that posture to be able to make those decisions is really crucial, to go to that place where you can be sitting on a technology, but you are careful in how you use it so as not to create other imbalances. And the wisdom it takes to do that, you know. It's a lot of responsibility, but it can certainly be done. And it is being done in great ways, tremendous ways. I know people directly doing that and cleaning up water bodies. Okay, thank you. I've run out of time. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you, and may this support you in some way, whatever that is, you know, whatever. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Randy. Yeah. Fabulous.
I got to get unhooked
here.
Well,
that was terrific. Absolutely. We're going to take a 10-minute break. This is going to be a very quick 10-minute break, so we can try to get back on time. Lots of the time because of the shortage of electricity that we had. We'll see you back in 10 minutes. So we've got over 15 children. Please give Randy Masters one more hand.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's neat stuff there.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you one question too. Whether is there a difference? I've heard